Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine you were standing in a massive gymnasium, but it's not a place for sports anymore. The air is thick, unbearably humid, heavy, sticky, and the smell, it's this overwhelming, cloying mixture of rotting flowers and something much, much worse, that sweet, putrid scent of decaying
Right,
bodies.
it's the smell of decomposition. It's completely unavoidable in that space.
Yeah. And outside, the sky is that strange bruised color. You know that look. When it's about to rain, the clouds are dark and low, but the rain just won't fall. It's suspended. There's this massive tension in the atmosphere. And inside, in this cavernous space, you see candles. Hundreds of them.
But they aren't in proper holders, are they?
Exactly, no. They're stuck into the necks of empty glass drink bottles just flickering in the draft.
Mm.
And right in the middle of this intense sensory overload, there is a boy.
A young boy, Dong-ho, he's barely 15 years old.
Yeah. He's crouching down on the floor, trying to maintain some semblance of order in a world that has gone completely, violently chaotic. This is the central image that pulls us into the deep dive today. We are looking at a text that is difficult, visceral, and I would argue absolutely necessary reading for anyone trying to understand the human condition. The book name is Human Acts by Han Kang.
It really is a masterpiece. And you're right, it is necessary. It's a work that doesn't just tell you about a historical event like a textbook would.
Yeah.
It forces you to inhabit it. It grabs you by the collar and drags you into the room. It's an exploration of violence, sure, but it's also deeply about the soul.
Yeah, it asks a really fundamental question, like what remains of our humanity when the absolute worst things imaginable happen to us?
Exactly. And the author sets up this incredible tension right from the first page. You have this boy, Dong-ho, and he's surrounded by coffins and corpses.
And he's not just a witness.
Right, he's working. He's looking for his friend, but he's also taking care of the dead. It's haunting.
It is. But before we get into Dong Ho's head, and we will, because the book puts us right there with him, we really need to set the stage. We need to understand the world he's living in. What is the backdrop here? Because the text mentions that South Korea in 1980 was, quote, a heap of dry tinder waiting for a spark.
That is the perfect metaphor for the geopolitical situation at the time.
Yeah.
To understand Gwangju, which is the city where this narrative takes place, you have to understand the massive power vacuum that had just opened up in South Korea.
Right.
You have to remember, for nearly 2 decades, the country had been ruled by Park Chung-hee,
The military strongman.
the quintessential military dictator. Yeah. He had overseen this massive economic transformation, what they call the miracle on the Han River. He dragged South Korea from poverty to industrialization.
But it came at a tremendous cost.
A huge cost. We're talking severe human rights abuses,
Yeah.
a rewritten constitution to make his rule effectively permanent, absolute repression of speech. He essentially was the state.
And then suddenly, in October 1979, he's gone.
Assassinated. And not by a rebel, but by the director of his own security services.
Wow.
It was a massive shock to the system. So you have this moment where the lid is suddenly taken off the pressure cooker. There's this brief, dizzying hope for democracy. People thought, okay, the dictator is dead. Now we get to be free.
But it was a vacuum, not a victory, and nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. Into that exact space steps
Yeah.
Chen Duan,
Another general.
another army general. He stages a military coup in December of that same year. And by May of 1980, he expands martial law to the entire country. We're talking about closing universities, banning political activities, totally curtailing the press.
That's locking everything down again.
Right. And the text tells us that the citizens recognized a dictator when they saw one. They just lived through 18 years of Park, so they weren't about to accept Chun without a fight.
And that fight centers on Gwangju. I'm curious, though, why Gwangju specifically? Was it just random luck that it happened there, or was there something about that city?
It definitely wasn't random. Gwangju is in the far south of the Korean peninsula. Historically, it's a region known for dissent. It had been politically underrepresented in the central government for a long time and economically neglected compared to Seoul or the southeast.
So there was already a lot of resentment built up.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It felt almost like a different country in terms of mentality. So when the student demonstration started there, asking for the end of martial law, they weren't just students. They were swelled by factory workers who had been unionizing. It was a perfect storm of students and laborers coming together.
So you have the dry tinder, and the spark that lit that tinder wasn't just the protests themselves, right? It was the government's response.
Yes, it was the sheer disproportionate brutality of the response.
Yeah.
Paratroopers were sent in. And we have to be really clear here. These weren't regular police doing standard crowd control.
No.
These are special forces trained for warfare. And they didn't just arrest people. According to the accounts in the book, they clubbed them, bayoneted them, stripped them in the streets. They beat bystanders who weren't even protesting.
That escalation is key to understanding the whole event. It wasn't a dispersal, it was a massacre in slow motion.
Right. And that brutality against unarmed citizens was so shocking that it caused something totally unprecedented. The citizens didn't flee, they fought back.
They actually fought back.
They did. They raided armories, armed themselves with antiquated rifles from the reserve forces, and they actually managed to drive the army out of the city center.
That's the uprising part of the history.
Yes. For a few days, Gwangju was free. There was a brief respite, a genuine moment of self-rule. But the book, Human Acts, doesn't start with the shootouts or the heroism or the David and Goliath narrative that movies usually focus on. It doesn't give us the victory lap.
No, it starts with the aftermath. It starts when the party is over and the bill comes due. It starts with the bodies.
Han Kang starts with the piles of bodies, the reeking, unclaimed, unburied bodies. And that is the true mission at our deep dive today. We aren't just recounting a historical timeline. We are going to explore how Han Kang uses what we call a polyphonic structure to reconstruct this massive trauma.
Polyphonic meaning many voices.
Exactly. Think of it like a choir. But they aren't singing in simple harmony. They're singing a canon, where the melody enters at different times and in different keys.
Right.
You have the ghost of a boy in 1980, a terrified editor in 1985, a factory worker in 2002. They're all singing the same song, the Song of Gwangju, but from completely different angles. It forces us to see that trauma isn't a straight line, it's a web.
We also need to unpack this idea of the ontological dilemma. That sounds super heavy, but the book actually makes it very concrete.
It is heavy, but it's essential to the text. Ontology is the study of being. What makes a thing a thing? The dilemma here is, at what exact moment does a human being stop being a person and start being meat?
Wow, yeah.
Dong-ho is looking at these bodies, rotting, bloating, smelling, and he's desperately trying to keep them in the person category. But biology is pulling them into the meat category. That tension is the core horror of his chapter.
And finally, we need to look at the radioactive half-life of this trauma, because this book shows us very clearly that the massacre didn't just neatly end in 1980. It continued in the minds and bodies of the survivors for decades. It's like radiation. It stays in the soil.
Precisely. It lingers and mutates.
So let's go back to that gymnasium. Section 1, The Boy, 1980. The most striking thing about this chapter is the perspective. It's written in the second person. You mutter to yourself, you open your eyes. It's talking to Dong-ho, but it feels like it's talking directly to me. To you listening.
It's a very deliberate, somewhat aggressive narrative choice. By using you, the author collapses the distance between the reader and the boy. You aren't watching Dong-ho from a safe distance. You are Dong-ho. You are the one smelling the rot. You are the one swatting away the flies.
And the logistics of death he is dealing with is completely overwhelming. He's a kid, a middle schooler. He should be doing homework or playing soccer. Instead, he's keeping a ledger. He's numbering corpses. He's putting white cloth over their faces.
He's trying to impose order on chaos. That's a very fundamentally human coping mechanism. If I can just list them, if I can just number them, then maybe it all makes sense. But the physical reality fights him constantly.
The text describes the putrid stink so vividly. The bodies are bloating. There's a clear distinction made between those recently killed and those who have been there much longer.
That detail about the decomposition is horrific, but it's essential to the book's mission. He talks about seeing a young woman who had been killed. Initially, she was recognizable. But as time passes in that humid, unair-conditioned gym, she bloats to the size of a grown man. Her toes turn into the thick tubers of ginger.
Ugh. That image, tubers of ginger, it really sticks with you.
It's meant to. It emphasizes that the body is matter. It rots, it gasses up, it loses its form entirely. Han Kang refuses to sanitize death. She forces us to look at the stark biology of it.
There's that specific detail about the cross-shake of the piles, too.
Yes. The text notes that the soldiers piled the bodies in a cross shape. It's sufficient for stacking, I suppose,
Yeah.
but it's also a profound desecration. That image actually comes back later in the book from the perspective of a soul looking down. But for Dong-ho, the immediate task is managing this horror on the ground.
And amidst all this, he encounters a paradox that really confuses him. I think this is one of the most important political questions in the book, the national anthem.
Yes, the anthem.
I have to be honest, I got really stuck on this part. It felt almost like cognitive dissonance. You have soldiers wearing the country's uniform, paid by the country's taxes, shooting kids, and then the families come to collect the bodies and they put them in coffins, and then they drape the taegugi, the national flag, over the coffins, and they sing the national anthem.
Right.
Dong-ho asks why. Why sing the anthem for people killed by the nation?
It's a profound, piercing question. He asks, why would you sing the national anthem for people who'd been killed by soldiers? Why cover the coffin with the taegugi? As though it wasn't the nation itself that had murdered them. It feels like a glitch in the Matrix, doesn't it?
Completely. If I were him, I'd want to burn the flag.
That's the intuitive reaction. Burn it all down. But Unsuk, one of the older girls helping him in the gym, corrects him. She stops him from spiraling into that nihilism.
What does she say?
She says, the generals are rebels. They seized power unlawfully. The ordinary soldiers were following the orders of their superiors. How can you call them the nation?
So she's making a hard distinction between the state and the nation.
Precisely. She is positing something genuinely radical for that moment. That the army stole the nation. That the flag doesn't belong to the shooter, it belongs to the victim. By covering the butchered meat with the flag, they are trying to perform a kind of alchemy. They are trying to turn that rotting flesh back into a citizen.
They are reclaiming the dignity of the nation from the dictatorship that hijacked it.
Exactly. It's a defiant act of reclamation.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
It's saying, you can kill us, but you can't take the country from us. But Dong-ho, he's 15. He understands the politics vaguely, but he is really struggling with the spiritual side of it all. He's looking at these bodies, and he has this internal monologue. When the body dies, what happens to the soul?
This is where the title, Human Acts, starts to vibrate with its deeper meaning. There's a scene where he is lighting candles. He looks into the center of the flame. He sees a tiny blue-tinged core that looks like a heart or an apple seed. He wonders if the souls are lingering there, like birds fluttering near their former homes.
It's poetic, but it's born of sheer trauma.
Right. He needs to believe the souls are still there, because he is looking for someone specific. He isn't just volunteering out of abstract civic duty. He's looking for his friend, Jongdae.
Jongdae, who was shot right in front of him.
Yes. And Jongdae's sister, Jongmi. Dong-ho is driven by this immense crushing guilt. He survived. When the shooting started, he did what any child would do. He ran, and Jongdae fell. Dong-ho is in that gym trying to atone for the fact that he is still breathing.
He's almost waiting for his own death, in a way.
He is. He even thinks to himself, is it true that human beings are fundamentally cruel? He's witnessing the absolute worst of humanity, but at the same time, he's performing an act of incredible care.
And that act of care ends abruptly. We know from the history books that the army comes back, they retake the city. But the book shifts gears on us here. We jump forward. Section 2. The editor. 1985. 5 years later, we are with Yoon-suk, the girl who was helping in the gym.
And we immediately see that the violence hasn't stopped. It has just changed form. It's gone from the explicit, loud violence of guns to the quiet, structural violence of the police state. The chapter opens with physical trauma. At 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, the editor Kim Yoon-suk received 7 slaps to her right cheek.
7 slaps. It's so meticulously specific. It's not just she was beaten, it's 7 slaps.
The precision makes it worse, doesn't it? The text details the damage, the burst capillaries, the blood trickling down, the damage to her eardrum. She's being interrogated by the police. But notice her reaction to it. It's total dissociation.
She says a part of oneself must be temporarily detached.
Yes. She treats her body like it's a coat she can just take off. She lets them slap the meat of her face while her mind folds away like paper to protect itself.
Why are they slapping her in the first place? What is her crime? Is she a terrorist?
Not at all. She works for a publisher. She's simply editing a translation of a book on crowd psychology. But the authorities are paranoid, absolutely paranoid about anything that might incite revolution or discuss violence in any analytical way. This brings us right to the theme of censorship as violence.
The black ink?
Yes, the ink. She goes to the censor's office, and they have literally painted over whole paragraphs with a roller of black ink. It's a physical erasure of thought. But there's a specific passage they deleted that haunts her completely.
It asks, what is humanity? What do we have to do to keep humanity as one thing and not another? That question really is the heartbeat of the book, and the censors blacked it out. Why?
Because the answer is fundamentally dangerous to a dictatorship. If humanity is something you have to do, something you have to keep, then it implies you can lose it. Or worse, that those in power have already lost it. It implies that being human is an active choice, and the government has chosen to be inhuman. They simply can't allow that thought to exist on paper.
Unsuk is living this half-life. She's functioning, she's working, but inside she's completely shattered. And then she goes to see a play. This scene, it gave me literal chills. It's a play that defies censorship, but in the most unique, devastating way.
It's a silent play. The actors move their lips with intense emotion, but no sound comes out at all.
Just pause and visualize that as a listener. You're in a theater, the lights go down, the actors come out, they are screaming, weeping, arguing, but there is not a single decibel of sound. It's suffocating just to imagine sitting there.
It is suffocating. It's a brilliant metaphor for the era's speech is legally forbidden, but the truth is still being forcefully spoken through the body. It's not just censorship as a distant concept. It's the visceral, physical experience of having your voice stolen from your throat.
And Unsuk, sitting in the audience watching this, starts to hallucinate. Or maybe it's a memory bleeding through. She sees a boy on the stage.
She sees Dong-ho.
She sees Dong-ho, the boy from the gym in 1980.
Yes, she sees him being dragged away by soldiers. And the lines from the play, the lines she knows by heart because she edited the manuscript, resonate in her head. After you died, I could not hold a funeral. And so my life became a funeral.
My life became a funeral. That entirely sums up the survivor's experience, doesn't it? They are walking funerals.
Exactly. They are living monuments to the dead. They cannot escape the memory. Unsuk realizes she hasn't moved on a single inch. She is still stuck in that gymnasium, wiping blood off bodies. The slap she received that afternoon is just an echo of the bullets from 1980.
It's interesting you mentioned the echo of violence, because Section 3 takes us even deeper into that exact darkness. We jump to 1990, The Prisoner. This section is, look, I'll be honest, this was incredibly hard to read. It's about a man who survived the torture after the uprising was crushed.
It is very hard to read, but this is where the book confronts the true anatomy of cruelty directly. We meet a narrator who is being interviewed by a professor about another survivor, Kim Jin-soo, who has recently committed suicide. The narrator and Jin-soo were in prison together. And here, Han Kang introduces perhaps the most philosophical concept of the novel, the glass metaphor.
Right. Let's really dig into this because it changes everything. The narrator recalls Jin-soo saying, "We used to have a kind of glass that couldn't be broken. It was only when we were shattered that we proved we had souls, that what we really were was humans made of glass."
Stop and think about the physics of that for a second. We usually describe human resilience as steely or rock hard. We say someone has an iron will. But Han Kang completely flips the physics of the soul here. She says we are glass.
Why glass, though?
Because glass is transparent. You can see the truth through it, but it shatters under pressure. And once it shatters, sure, you can glue it back together, but the cracks are permanent. The light never hits it the same way again. It suggests that brokenness isn't a failure of strength. It's a fundamental property of being human. If you hit a human hard enough, they will break. That's not weakness, that's structural reality.
And the details of how they were broken, it's not just the grand horror of it, it's the terrifying banality of it. The Monami Biro.
This is a devastating, sickening detail. A Monami Biro is just a cheap, common ballpoint pen. Everyone in Korea had one on their desk. It's a mundane domestic object. But the text describes how soldiers would twist a prisoner's fingers and jam the pen between them to inflict excruciating pain.
It turns a tool of writing, a tool of civilization and expression, into a tool of brutal torture. It makes you look at your own desk entirely differently.
It should. The text explicitly describes how the torture wasn't just about extracting information or inflicting physical pain. It was about deliberately erasing humanity. The soldiers treated them like ravening beasts or lumps of meat.
They stripped them, beat them, made them eat dirt.
Yes. They turned them into animals to prove to themselves that the prisoners weren't human. Psychologically, if I can make you act like a dog, then I don't have to feel guilty about treating you like a dog. It's a horrific rationalization of cruelty.
The narrator asks a really hard, uncomfortable question about this. He asks if this cruelty is actually imprinted in our genetic code. He references Vietnam, Nanjing, Bosnia. He's fundamentally asking, is this the real human act? Is the violence the baseline truth and the dignity just a comforting illusion we tell ourselves?
That is the central, agonizing tension of the narrative. The psychological autopsy mentioned earlier, the professor wants to know why Jin-soo killed himself 10 years later. Why not immediately? Why wait a decade?
Right, why hold on for so long just to let go?
The narrator explains that the trauma doesn't end upon release. The world, as he puts it, darkened like electric bulbs going out one by one. Jin-soo didn't truly die in 1990. He started dying in 1980. The suicide was just the final bulb going out after 10 years of creeping darkness.
And this is the huge, but that keeps the book from being purely nihilistic. The narrator also remembers the uprising itself. He remembers the moment of unity.
Yes. This is crucial for balance. We can't just look at the torture. We have to look at what happened just before it. For a few days in Gwangju, complete strangers shared blood at the hospital. They shared rice balls in the street. There was no looting, no crime. The narrator calls it the dazzling purity of conscience.
He asks, "Have you ever known it, Professor, that feeling as if you yourself have undergone some kind of alchemy, been purified, made wholly virtuous?"
That is the profound tragedy. The moment of highest humanity, that absolute selfless unity, led directly to the experience of lowest inhumanity in the torture chambers. The glass was most beautiful right before it was shattered. The book asks us to hold both of these truths simultaneously. Humans are genuinely capable of the Monami Bureau torture, and humans are genuinely capable of the dazzling purity of Gwangju. Both are human acts.
So we have the boy, the editor, the prisoner. Now we move forward again to 2002, section 4, the factory girl. This is Lim Seonju. And this section really highlights a dimension we haven't deeply touched on yet, the gendered aspect of this history.
It does, and it's a vital correction to the typical historical record. Often when we talk about revolutions or uprisings, we focus almost exclusively on the men with guns. But the labor movement in South Korea was heavily driven by female factory workers, known as factory girls. But their experience of the state violence was significantly different. Seonju recalls being called a red bitch by the soldiers.
We really need to pause on the specific vocabulary there because it's deeply tactical. Red, obviously, meaning communist.
Right. Red is the political license to kill it. Labels you an enemy of the state. It says, you are a North Korean spy, which was the government's standard excuse for the violent crackdown. But bitch? That's entirely different. That's the gendered license to dominate. It moves the violence from the political realm to the biological realm.
Han Kang is showing us that for the women in the labor movement, the terror was two-pronged. They weren't just afraid of dying. They were afraid of being unmade as women.
Exactly. The text clearly alludes to sexual violence, doesn't it?
It does. It alludes to sexual torture, forced stripping, intense degradation. Seonju vividly remembers the factory girls forming a human wall to protect their union leaders. It wasn't just a standard protest tactic. It was a desperate attempt to use their collective bodies as a physical shield because they knew exactly what the soldiers would do to a woman caught alone.
It's a horrifying calculation to have to make.
And in 2002, she's working for an environmental group. Her colleagues call her a human search engine because she's so intensely diligent and detail-oriented. But she's hiding this massive past.
She's trying to stay invisible. When the professor, the exact same one who interviewed the prisoner in the previous chapter, tries to interview her, she adamantly refuses. She says, enduring things is what you do best. She has built a massive fortress wall around that memory. She refuses to be categorized as a victim again.
But there's a phrase that keeps coming back to her, a mantra from her old union days. We are noble.
We are noble. It was what they told themselves when they were working grueling hours in sweatshops, when they were being beaten by strikebreakers. It's a fierce assertion of dignity against a world that treats them as entirely disposable.
But Seonju really struggles with it now. How can you feel noble when you know what was done to you, when you know how easily your body can be violated? Can you claim nobility after you've been shattered so completely?
That's the psychic wound she carries. And her connection to Dong-ho was revealed here too, which tightens the narrative web.
Right, she was there.
She was. She was one of the older girls in the gymnasium with him, and she realizes she feels deeply responsible. She thinks, if I demanded that you go home, Dong-ho, you would have done as I asked, wouldn't you? This web of guilt connects absolutely everyone.
Eun-suk feels guilty she survived. The prisoner feels guilty his friend died. Seonju feels guilty she didn't force the boy to leave. The boy felt guilty he didn't save his friend. It's a continuous, cascading waterfall of survivor's guilt.
It is. Which brings us to perhaps the most raw, painful voice of all. Section 5, The Voice of the Mother, said in 2010.
This section is it's a masterpiece of voice. The text notes that it is written in a thick Gwangju dialect. The translator mentions trying to capture this rustic, warm, highly specific tone. It totally grounds the story. This isn't an academic or an intellectual reflecting on history. This is a mother talking to her dead son.
She's speaking directly to Dong-ho. It's 30 years later, but she is still talking to him as if he's right there.
And her grief has become her politics. This is a very important aspect of the Gwangju aftermath. The mothers became fierce activists.
Yes. She says, Chunduan, you murdered my son. She calls out the dictator directly by name. She describes how the bereaved mothers formed groups. They were arrested, dragged away, dumped in remote areas by the police to silence them, but they always found their way back to each other.
It really changes our idea of mourning. We usually think of mourning as quiet, private, sitting in a dark room. But here, mourning is incredibly loud. It's a public protest.
Exactly. It's mourning as mobilization. But underneath the activism, there was also the unending private agony. She talks about the unfinished funeral. She says, after you died, I could not hold a funeral, and so my life became a funeral.
That line again, it directly echoes Eunsook's thought from the play.
It does. It shows how the trauma is a shared reality. The mother has been living a 30-year funeral every single day.
There's this beautiful, absolutely heartbreaking imagery she uses at the end of her section. She talks about walking in the dark versus walking in a sunny place with flowers.
She imagines Dong-ho leading her out of the dark, leading her to a place where flowers are blooming. It's a desperate wish for peace, for an end to the funeral that her life has become. But she knows she is still in the dark. She is still fighting. She is holding the shards of this shattered glass together with her bare, bleeding hands.
Which finally brings us to the epilogue. The Writer, 2013. This is Han Kang herself stepping out from behind the narrative curtain. She enters the text as herself.
This creates a fascinating metatextual layer of reality. She reveals a deep personal connection to the events. She lived in Gwangju. In fact, she lived in the very house, the traditional hanok, that Dong-ho's family moved into after her family moved out.
Wait, so Dong-ho slept in her room?
Yes. Dong-ho slept in the exact room she used to sleep in. She moved to Seoul just months before the uprising happened. So she has this profound survivor's guilt by proxy. She grew up safely in Seoul, hearing terrified whispers from the adults about the massacre back home.
She remembers her father bringing home a secretly circulated photo book of the bodies and hiding it. But she found it and saw it.
Right. So the book isn't just a historical fiction exercise for her. It's her attempt to deal with her own lifelong haunting. She talks about how Gwangju became a symbol.
She notes that Gwangju became a proper noun for whatever is forcibly isolated, beaten down, and brutalized.
Exactly. She mentioned seeing a burning tower in Seoul in 2013, likely a reference to the real-life Yongsan tragedy where tenant protesters were killed. And her immediate thought is, that's Gwangju. Gwangju isn't just a city in the south anymore. It's a recurring event of state violence. It's a tragic pattern that keeps repeating.
And what is her core mission here? Why write this intensely painful book? Why put herself and the reader through this?
She says she wants to keep the boy Dong-ho from being desecrated again. She wants to literally light a candle for him through her prose. It's an act of literary resurrection. If the soldiers turn the people into meat, the writer is trying to use language to turn them back into souls. She's trying to fight the entropy of death.
It goes right back to that initial question of the soul. Can we put the shattered glass back together?
That is the ultimate question. The book synthesizes this entire journey, from the piles of bodies in the gym, to the censor's black ink, to the torture chamber, to the union meetings, and finally to the writer's desk. It presents a stark battle between two fundamentally different kinds of human acts.
On one side, the act of violence, the torture, the killing, the Monami Bureau.
And on the other side, the act of immense dignity, the washing of rotting bodies, the singing of the anthem, the forming of a human wall to protect others, the writing of a book to remember. The text forcefully implies that humanity isn't a given permanent state.
It's not something we inherently have, like we have 2 arms and 2 legs.
No, it's something we do. And it's fragile. It's glass.
The psychological autopsy asked why the survivor died. But looking at all these intertwined voices, the book really seems to ask, how do any of them survive at all?
They survive by remembering. But that remembering is incredibly painful. It's a radioactive memory. It burns you to hold it. But dropping it, forgetting, would be the ultimate betrayal.
So here's the final thought to leave you with as you reflect on all this. We talked extensively about the glass metaphor, that we are humans made of glass and systemic violence shatters us. The big question this book leaves hanging in the air is, if that glass is shattered, can it ever truly be put back together? Or is the act of remembering, like Han Kang writing this book, like us talking about it today, like the mother fighting for 30 years, is that the glue? Is the act of witnessing the only way to hold the shards together, even knowing the cracks will never, ever go away?
It's a deeply profound question without a comfortable answer. But human acts demands that we look closely at those shards. It demands that we don't look away from the brokenness.
Until next time, keep diving deep.